Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining the Blue Agility Agile Empowered webinar series. We're going to go ahead and get started. This webinar, Empower the Team with bluejazz, Bridging the Gap with SAFe Agile Planning, will take a deep dive into SAFe at the program level and how bluejazz can support your Agile implementation. Just a reminder that this is part 3 to a 4-part webinar series. My name is Ashley Bailey, Director of Marketing and Communications, and here with me today are your presenters, Mike Bonamassa, President of Blue Agility, and Pratik Bengali, Chief Technologist, also for Blue Agility. We'll walk you through the key concepts, ceremonies, and artifacts in SAFe at the program level within an enterprise adoption. Before we get started, there are a few things that I would like to note. To avoid background noise, we do have you all on mute for the duration of the webinar, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. So please, if you have a question or a comment, enter it through the question screen on the right-hand side of your GoToWebinar panel. Throughout the webinar, Mike and Pratik will answer questions both live and via the chat screen. This webinar is being recorded, and the link to the replay will be made available to you within 24 hours. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to your first presenter, Mike Bonamassa. Mike, go ahead.
Thanks, Ashley, and welcome, everyone. We're going to talk today, as Ashley said, about the program level inside the Scaled Agile Framework, or SAFe. I'm going to start out with just a real brief context setting where we'll actually talk about the big picture to make sure that those who haven't been here in previous seminars are familiar with the overall SAFe structure. Then we're going to dive right into the program level, talk about some of the rules, responsibilities, focus on intent and how intent flows through the Scaled Agile Framework. Then we're going to look inside the program, and the program is characterized by this thing called a program increment. So we're going to go inside there, talk about release planning, how the program executes, and then how you continually improve things. Then we're going to segue over to a couple slides on continuous delivery and DevOps, which is absolutely key to maximizing the value that you get out of applying SAFe. And then we're going to talk about a few things that you don't want to do, some things that we'd say are unsafe, at any speed, so some things to avoid. And then I'm going to turn it over to Pratik, and he's going to give you a demonstration on bluejazz and how we support SAFe with that product as well. And as Ashley said, this is, even though you're on mute, we absolutely encourage questions and that sort of thing, and there's no question that isn't appreciated. Because we're all in the process of learning and understanding, and it helps me make this better, understanding questions or things that I haven't represented to you that might be in your mind. So please feel free to ask anything as we get going. Okay, so this is the big picture in SAFe. So if you were to go to scaledagileFramework.com, you'd see this diagram, and it's aptly named. It's big, and it's a picture. There's a lot of information on the Scaled Agile Framework. As a matter of fact, if you go out to scaledagileFramework.com, you'll see that you can click on virtually any part of this diagram, and it'll take you into a wealth of content that describes SAFe. SAFe is a freely available, public-facing website. Scaled Agile Incorporated owns the rights to it. It's a company that's headed by Dean Leffingwell. Dean, just to give you a little bit of history, came out of Rational like many of us, and is just a phenomenal synthesizer of things. And so what you see in SAFe is actually a synthesis of best practices. You'll see practices. It's built on top of Agile practices. It's takes lean principles as an integral aspect to it, and you also see things that have been adopted from iterative and incremental development. If you put those three together, you really have SAFe, and SAFe is just an incredibly powerful scaling mechanism for taking agility across the enterprise. We're fortunate enough at Blue Agility to be 100% focused on SAFe implementations and transformations with very large enterprise clients. So a little bit more about SAFe. It's characterized by three different focus areas. The first focus area is the portfolio. And in SAFe, the portfolio is actually the only place where we use any kind of centralized planning or centralized execution. And that's because the portfolio really drives things like budgets. Those things can be adjusted, but typically they're adjusted, maybe quarterly, but most likely, annually or twice a year. But the portfolio is absolutely important because the portfolio is what drives intent into the program, and the program is the level that realizes and all of this intent. Breaks it down into pieces that can be consumed by teams, creates alignment for these teams, then alignment to the portfolio intent, and then focuses the execution control within your program. The program area, just like anything else in Agile, is also designed to provide information back up. So even though there's intent that flows down in terms of functional intent, architectural intent, and even release intent, or what I would call temporal intent, you also have the program then validating these things, going in deeper, understanding them, and providing feedback back up to the portfolio level to say, this is doable, this is not doable, and that sort of thing. Then you have the team focus. The team focus is very similar to what you would see in traditional Agile. Teams do sprint planning, commitment, retrospectives. It's completely decentralized execution. There's no project plans or anything like that. It's all Agile at its core. One of the key things, though, that is unique inside SAFe that we find very powerful is the fact that when you go through the planning exercises at the program level, which is called release planning, we'll get more into that a little bit later, the teams recognize what the cross-team dependencies are, and they own those dependencies through the execution at the team level. And that's absolutely crucial, because what you find as you scale agility, when you get beyond 5 or 6 teams trying to sprint together, you need to have some sort of a ceremony or something that allows those teams to understand the dependencies between each other. And the fact that that's done in release planning and SAFe, and that those teams then own that dependency. There's not a Scrum Master or some master spreadsheet or tool that's tracking those. It's the teams that own that dependency and commitment that's absolutely crucial. So we're going to focus today really on the program level in SAFe. So let's go in a little bit deeper into that right now. So when we talk about the program, this is really what we're talking about, even though there's a tab on there that shows program. The program is really a virtual organization. It's a team of teams. There's a few roles that exist at the program level, and we'll talk about those in a second. But really, the program is the collection of teams that are sprinting together. Those teams form what we call an Agile release train. And the Agile release train is the primary delivery vehicle of value to the organization. You can scale up and down an Agile release train, again, as budgets dictate. So if you update your budgets, twice a year, you might see changes to the size of the Agile release train. But the function, the way the Agile release train executes, is always consistent. And once the train launches, there's no stops. It's just like Agile sprint teams. And as one sprint ends, the next sprint begins the next day. The same thing is true for the Agile release train. And we measure the Agile release train progress in terms of program increments, which we'll talk more about in here. And again, one of the primary reasons behind the program is actually to establish a social network among the teams. There's a key aspect to this called Dunbar's number, which is a number that kind of came out of psychology. It's basically the number of people that you can have an empathetic relationship with, some sort of a social relationship with. And that number is between 100 to 150 people. Obviously, it varies from person to person. But what it means is that, and we've all done this, right? So you're out in you're out on the road, and someone cuts you off, and it's real easy to have a whole bunch of rage and not like that or something. But if that same person was late for flight and stepped in front of you and said, "Hey, can I get through the security line? I'm really late for a flight." You might be a little upset, but you're going to create some empathy, and it's going to change your behavior. What we're really trying to do here at the program level is to create that empathy across teams, because we prefer that teams focus on overall achievement of the program rather than specific phenomenal achievement of any one team, because together teams can deliver more than any one team can through local excellence. So that's what the program level is. Inside the program, there are some key roles in here. There's a product manager role that's called out. The product manager is absolutely key to the Scaled Agile framework and being successful at scaling your agility. The product manager also hosts the product management team. The product management team is the product manager and all of the product owners from the teams. The product manager has the responsibility to go up to the portfolio level and pull epics out of the backlog that are ready to be consumed by the program. Then the product manager, along with the product owners, will groom out that backlog into a set of features. And then those features then are further decomposed into stories and tasks that the team can actually execute on. One of the key things that the product manager needs to do is develop a vision and a roadmap. And one of the things that we hear a lot from people, and one of the, I think, the real powerful aspects of the Scaled Agile framework is this ability to interleave in both the functional intent and the temporal intent of when things are to be are desired to be released. And we'll talk more about maximizing flow and stuff in a little bit. But one key problem that you see in a lot of Agile implementations is you have this kind of mindset that we're Agile, we're just doing burn down, and we'll get done when we get done. And hey, big man, I can't tell you what we're going to be doing 6 months from now. Well, SAFe doesn't have you plan out in 6 month increments or anything that breaks the core Agile preferences. But what it does do is it clearly flows down intent from the portfolio. So it's not uncommon for your epics in the portfolio to have specific dates that those are desired to be delivered by. Now those will be refined. The minimum viable product of that epic will be refined by the release team, release management team, and product management and that sort of thing. But it is definitely intent that flows down, and that intent then is informed by the planning and the activities the teams do. I mean, as the teams begin to plan and execute, it may become very apparent that there's no way you're going to be able to achieve the original dates desired in that. You'll know that early. You'll be able to give that feedback and then make adjustments as appropriate, with your sprinting cycle. The other thing that you'll be able to do is to really start to get some sense of a program cadence where the program is delivering value potentially every sprint, delivering that into production, which will allow you to also create validation on that release intent. Then there's this other team at the program level called the system team. And when I first learned about SAFe, this was kind of the magic sauce for me. The special sauce was the system team. Because again, as you start to scale up initiatives with Agile, one of the key issues that you have is that you start to need big enterprise services. So as a small team, you might be developing in a local environment that you have a lot of control over. Or even your production environment might be a pretty simple environment to deliver into. It might be a departmental app. But as you start to move the big rocks in the organization, you start to need big environments. You need to start to have big middleware services, big test data services, actually using potentially live production data that's set aside that has all kinds of security and attribution requirements and that sort of thing associated with it. So the system team is a team that sprints along with the Agile teams, and they handle that synchronization and interfacing to the broader enterprise areas. So those enterprise organizations that have these SLAs to deliver environments and that sort of thing are really represented within the system team. And because of that, the system team is quite often larger than your typical Agile team of 7 plus or minus 2. You might see 14, 15 people on a system team, and the composition of the system team may change over time as the program matures and develops. You may need less and less network changes after an initial period of time, and more focus on load testing or audit or things like that. And so your system team is there to do that. You also potentially even have fractional resources associated with the system team. But the key thing is that system team plans with and sprints with those Agile teams. So they absolutely understand the commitments. They have cross-team commitments that they make in that planning process as well. So that's absolutely crucial for part of the program. The next I mentioned before a little bit is the release management team. The release management team is the product manager, as well as a number of external people to the program. They're essential in shaping, especially in a continuous delivery type world, the definition of done for the Agile release trains. The release management team will not only help define what the minimum viable product is, but they'll also start to prepare the way for these code deliveries into production. Because very often we tend to think that the system is ready to go into production when we've built the code, we've tested it, we've regress tested it, and we're able to actually transfer it into a production environment. There's a lot more. There's training of end users that have to go in. If it's a public-facing website, you have to prepare the call centers for increased volume that's going to potentially occur with new screens or new features that are added. And all of that is part of what release management does, kind of the organizational change management. And they're completely represented and aligned here in SAFe so that they can be aware of the progress of the program and make sure that goes smoothly as it integrates into the broader enterprise. The other aspect I mentioned, the shaping of the definition of done, is because a lot of times you have to have this training and stuff. Sometimes they will change what the requirements are for the definition of done for an Agile release train. So they may say that, hey, before we can go live with this, we absolutely have to have some sort of an audit that goes through to verify the system. So they'll bring those kind of requirements in that are typically globally applied before you can actually say you're completely done and ready for production. There's a role called the release train engineer. The release train engineer is the scrum master for the Agile release train. They have a huge role in SAFe. Not only do they keep the train on the track, they lead the scrum of scrums, they facilitate the release planning ceremony, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. And so the release train engineer is a huge role. And I was kind of liken the release train engineer and the product manager to the President of the United States. You know how they always get elected, they look fresh and bright, and then within a week they come out and they have all this gray hair and they look like they've aged about 30 years. Well, those are the roles that are going to age you quickly in SAFe, because there's a lot of things that come together there in those key roles. There's also a system architect. Not really a new role from a SAFe perspective, but SAFe does integrate in the concept of architecture across all the different focus areas of the Scaled Agile framework. One of the things that was really powerful in iterative development was the notion of bringing architecture earlier into the life cycle of projects. And what you see with the system architect role is they work with enterprise architects to make sure that large enterprise intent flows through naturally. They don't have the authority to put something in the backlog in a given place. What they do have the authority to do is to define the content and understand and represent that content for the product manager and represent the importance and relationship of that content to other functional content so that the product manager can put it in the right spot within the program backlog. So they work very closely with them. Another key thing that they do, and is another nice thing called out in SAFe in the program area, is this thing called the architectural runway. Architectural runway is important because it's the computer science-y stuff that we're trying to do to prepare for scaling and building out our system. So it's that balance of intentional architecture that we're putting in place for people to work, and that constrains them. But then the teams are working and building on top of that and adding to it, which is creating additional emergent design that flows out. but you have to have some of that done up front. So they work with the product manager to make sure that those things get put in there. Then we have this kind of area of different folks that are involved in the program level. You have your shared resources out there. It could be, DBAs, QA people like that. If you have a system that has some sort of a glass experience, then you're going to have UX involved, and these user experience folks are going to be involved in making sure that the experience at the glass for users is fully represented. And there's some great blogs out there on this topic, but the best way to think of it is that you're maintaining kind of a UX runway like you maintain an architectural runway in systems of significant user experience. And then finally, the DevOps team, and we'll talk more about DevOps in the DevOps section, but basically they're the team that bridges both the development and the production operations side of the business. And the goal is to, when things are done, there's, software and systems aren't like fine wine. They don't age well on the shelf. As soon as something's done and that value is created, we want to get that value into production. And DevOps is all about doing all the things that need to be done to automate and support continuous delivery. So let's talk a little bit about how intent flows down through here. So I mentioned that intent flows across all three areas. From the portfolio, we deal with things called epics. Epics are typically very large intent. They typically span program increments. They can span agile release trains as well. And there's typically a role called an epic owner that provides this intent to the program team and also flows this intent through the portfolio Kanban process. Now, excuse me, every organization is going to be different, and what you typically find in most organizations is that there's some group inside the business that originates intent. They ideate on it, and they then take that through to something that they want to do. Those intent owners, or whatever you call them in your organization, are what we're calling epic owners in SAFe. So it's an analogous role there. And then at the program level, we break those epics into features. We want those features to fit inside a given release. They need to be completed within a program increment, ideally sized to be fitting within a program increment. And to whatever extent you can, they should be isolated to not span agile release trains. And we can talk a little bit more about that when we get into some of the unsafe things later on. And then the product managers are the ones that actually maintain the backlog at the program level, and they provide that intent down to the sprint teams through the product owners, which are manifest then as user stories at the team level. User stories fit in sprints, they're derived from features, and the product owners are the content authority for those, set the team backlogs up, and they accept stories after the demo. The product manager accepts features after demos at that level, and the epic owners are involved in the accepting of epics when those are complete. There's a technique we use, and this technique is incredibly powerful. You're going to see more about it when we show you bluejazz and how that works. But it's called Weighted Shortest Job First, or WSJF. It's a lean economic prioritization, and it's incredibly important to promote flow in your system. One of the key problems that you have in moving to Agile or any kind of transformation in an organization is the fact that over the years with the project-based approaches in the past, what we've done is we've trained the business to not know when they're going to get resources from IT and to cache up everything they could potentially want and throw it at IT when they get access to those resources. And so these big batch activities of functionality that they want don't flow well in a lean organization. So what Weighted Shortest Job First does is, at first, it makes very obvious, excuse me, those very large batches, and it prefers small batches. And by doing that, it allows you to start having a better prioritization of your backlog and the right kind of conversations with the business. When you combine that with a continuous delivery through DevOps, which absolutely prefers small batches going into production because of the lower risk, then you can really start to get a good flow of value every 2 weeks into production, or even more frequently if you're more mature and that. So how do you do weighted shortest job first? Well, in order to do weighted shortest job first, there's two things we have to look at. We have to look at the cost of delay, and then we have to look at the duration to do a particular thing. So if you want to look at cost of delay, we break that down into three components: user business value, time criticality, and risk reduction or opportunity enablement. We're not going to go into excruciating detail on these, but typically most organizations simply look at business value as the prioritization mechanism for backlog. But realistically, business value is only one aspect to it. If you have something that might not be the highest business value, but is absolutely time critical because it's required for some remediation of something that you had through a governing organization or something like that, then its time criticality is going to be high. You typically have some timeline where this has to be done. Beyond that, you start to have penalties that kick in, or reduced value because you're operating at risk or something like that. So time criticality is in there. Risk reduction, things that allow you to reduce the overall risk to the enterprise or to the system. Opportunity enablement, things that allow you to get out there and maybe disrupt the market or set a new capability in the market. All of those factors are put together to represent what we call the cost of delay. So products that have a very high cost of delay obviously are preferred to products that have a lower cost of delay from a lean economic perspective. But in order to get weighted shortest job first, you also have to know what the duration is. And since in Agile we don't typically deal with weeks and months, we typically deal with kind of a relative estimating type thing. We're going to use size as a proxy for that. So we use size as a proxy for the duration, and size is typically determined both from a top down and a bottom up. So the product management team will come up with size, and it'll get validated from team leads down at the team level as well. So that kind of dynamic tension allows you to then come up with a weighted shortest job first. So large, big batches of things that don't have a high cost of delay are almost virtually guaranteed to get put down deep into the backlog, and we'll talk more about the backlog in just a second. Things that are smaller, even if they don't have a large cost of delay, will tend to be preferred. Their weighted shortest job first will be a little bit higher just because of the way the math works. Okay, so it's a really valuable tool to use. And what it does is it gets you out of the squeaky wheel syndrome for building out your backlog, and allows you to essentially have variables and some structured dialogue around why one thing should be done over another. I mentioned the backlog. So we're doing all of this to prioritize our backlog. So what is a backlog? Right? We have backlogs at the portfolio level, the program level, and at the team level inside SAFe. And the backlog, if it's in the backlog, it might get done. And that's a huge thing, because a lot of people say, well, if it's in the backlog, it's going to get done. No, if it's in the backlog, it might get done, because the backlog can change. Priorities can change. Things can be added to the backlog. Things can be removed from the backlog. But if it's not in the backlog, there should be no chance that it's going to get done. And we'll talk a little bit about how you handle production fixes and things like that. But the backlog has order to it. It has a 1 to N order, and that ordering of the backlog reinforces the release intent. So if we know we want to release certain features out in the market within a certain time that are related to a certain epic, then those features are obviously going to be preferred. They're going to have a higher cost of delay. That higher cost of delay is going to move their weighted shortest job first higher into that queue. When we talk about a backlog, it is this thing that exists, but it's also there's a process that goes around it called grooming, to make sure that the stuff that's highest priority, that's likely to get pulled from our backlog by teams for consumption and development, are really well understood. Things that are lower priority or further back, less likely to get pulled, can be a little more nebulous. Those are still going through socialization. The socialization aspect of grooming is incredibly important, and I can't state it enough, that teams that start with stories, features, epics, whatever level you want to go to, and they haven't seen it before, take a settling time. And so ideally, when you're going into release planning or even sprint planning, you want to have some amount of those features and those stories well understood and already talked about with the teams through the grooming process, so they're not hitting them cold, and they can be thoughtful in the questions and the conversation they have, and make sure that the acceptance criteria is well on. The other aspect that you see in there is these non-functional requirements. And these non-functional requirements, things like maintainability, scalability, those sorts of things, are typically represented in the definition of done for teams. Has it gone through load testing and that sort of thing. But all of those things together are aspects of the backlog. So let's talk about the program increment. The program increment is actually just a fractal of what you have at the team level inside of SAFe. So at the team level, teams, plan their sprints together, they commit to the sprint, they execute the sprint, and they retrospect on the sprint. They have a number of ceremonies along the way, daily stand-ups, scrum of scrums, things like that. Program increment is exactly the same. At the beginning of the program increment, it starts with release planning. The whole goal of release planning is not to plan out, and you can have your program increments vary in size. So if you have, let's say, a 5-sprint program increment, then you're going to have a total 10-week program increment. And you're not planning out all 10 weeks of sprints in that. But what you are trying to do is you're trying to understand, based on your velocity and capacity, can you absorb all the functionality in there? And what are the key dependencies between teams in there? So if you have dependencies, those are worked out during release planning. The contracts are actually established between teams. It's negotiated with the product management and with the product owners as to where those need to fall in, so that if I'm on team 2 and team 1 depends on me for something and I've promised to get it done in sprint 1, I've prioritized my backlog for that sprint and my commitment that I make when I go into sprint planning after release planning to take that into consideration. And if I can't meet that obligation, I go and I work that out directly with the team that I'm affecting, rather than having someone who has responsibility to do that for me. So release planning is all about getting the teams on the same page to work together. Let me see, we have a question here, and I can't see the whole question. I'm going to try. So the question is, so the higher the weighted short shot first number, the higher the priority of that item. And that's absolutely correct. When you look at it, you'll see that the higher things are the ones that you want to focus on prioritizing sooner in your backlog. So good question. So once you've planned the program increment through release planning, and in doing that, you've worked out those dependencies, you've set certain objectives, the business is in the room. The release planning is a huge ceremony. Typically, everyone on the Agile release tree is there, so you could have 150, 200 people in a room together planning, and it's a 2-day event, and it sounds like it's incredibly costly, and it is in terms of time and everything, but it's incredibly valuable to get teams on the same page. Once teams are done with that, they really move into an execution mode. And program increment execution is really just sprinting teams. The teams leave there now with the knowledge of these dependencies, and the system team is working on environments. They know when the environments are going to be needed, that sort of thing. They've made commitments to the team. Now the teams are able to look at their backlog, understand the prioritization of the features and that sort of thing, the vision that came out of that, and they're able to build out their sprint plans. They demonstrate results on those sprints, and then they have a retrospective just like they normally would in regular sprinting. Also during program increment execution, you have the release management team that meets every 2 weeks. You have a product management team that meets weekly. You have grooming that occurs at all levels, and this is a really difficult thing to show in SAFe or in any kind of a graphic, which is this concept that grooming is not just an activity that occurs, at this point and this point. You can have grooming sessions and that sort of thing, but grooming occurs all the time. Grooming is something where there's conversation going on about what's important to be done, and all that intent that's developed through that conversation is part of grooming. Grooming is manifested in a well-organized and well-structured set of backlogs. And then the release train engineer holds the scrum of scrums twice a week. At the end of the program increment, we end it with the inspect and adapt. In the inspect and adapt, it's a half-day workshop. It includes both the overall fully integrated demo, and that's important that ideally at the end of every sprint, these teams are completely integrated. The system team supports also working through any kind of integration issues that they have. You want to have a fully integrated system at the end of your sprints. So you have this fully integrated system demo. Then you have inspect and adapt workshop where you look at, what is it that we learned from this? What kind of issues do we have with program execution? How can we improve them? So it's basically that retrospective up at that level. And the goal for the inspect and adapt is to really create an environment where we're continually improving things. And when we talk a little bit later about change, we talk about why things like SAFe are important, because they give you a framework to start with, but it's the inspect and adapt that really makes that framework your own and relevant to your organization and completely tailored to the way that you work as teams. So going into DevOps and continuous delivery a little bit, we mentioned that there's this notion that at the end of there's this at the end of every sprint, you should be able to release your code if that code meets a minimum viable product as defined by the release management team. So our goal is to keep these teams in sync, and by keeping them aligned from a cadence, so they're all doing 2-week sprints, and having those sprints synchronized so they start and they end at the same time, then at the end of a sprint, we've got a fully integrated capability. If that integrated capability meets some minimum viable product definition, we should be able to release it at that time. We don't have to wait to the end of our program increment to release it. That's what we call developing in cadence and releasing on demand. In order to truly release on demand, you need to have a DevOps team. And I'll give you an example. I won't talk about the client, but at one of the clients we're at, one of the key things they do is, obviously, when they look at production, they look at things flowing into production and what the risk is associated with them. And obviously, these health and hygiene things that occur, these bug fixes and stuff, have relatively low risk flowing into production. But because they haven't automated putting these things into production, they batch these small changes up into big groups because it's a manual process. You have to dedicate an engineer to it. The engineer goes out and works to make these changes in there. So what happens is there doesn't seem to be much of a better impact to flow with pushing small things through as pushing large things through. And so by having a DevOps team that automates this so those small things can flow through really quickly because they're relatively low risk, you create a back pressure in the system to basically say, hey, if you've got something small that we can get done that has little impact on the overall operating environment, we can flow those things through. And then you have things like feature toggles that allow you to do things like incremental functionality, where you can deliver functionality but not actually make it evident in your system in the end. So let's talk about a few things that are unsafe at any speed, and then I'm going to turn it over to Pratik. First is multiple points of content authority. Every single backlog has to have a single owner for that backlog. At the program level, that's the product manager. At the team level, that's the product owner. At the portfolio level, that's the program portfolio management, typically an executive function in an organization. If you have multiple product owners or multiple product managers, you're going to have problems. You have to have work driven by backlog only. And so I put in there, what about ops support? Well, there's going to be times where ops needs are coming in. And if those have to be done in such a way that they can't be flowed into your backlog, they're more urgent, then you have to do some sort of a capacity allocation or something like that to support it. But it should still be made visible, and you should still plan out full utilization of the team. Just commit to a lower level in case some of those ops things come in. The second one is the Agile release trains are not aligned to value streams. We see this very common where organizations align their Agile release streams to platforms or systems inside IT. The problem that you have with that is that value streams are the way you make money. It's a concept of cash. Value streams are the way the business works. And so the output of a value stream is something of value that you're going to make money on that's going to have an impact on your organization. Platforms are simply a means to deliver that value, and they're not the end in of themselves. And the problem that you have is if you have your Agile release trains aligned to platforms and you have multiple value streams coming in, you're creating a multi-queue situation, which really slows down flow in an organization. The other is that these SAFe programs are value creation engines, and you don't want to abuse them. Really think about them as an engine. Fuel them well with clear socialized content, and steer them with prioritized intent. Make sure that the priorities represent when you want things done, and you'll have a very effective Agile release train engine out there. If you don't do that, you're going to have a lot of herky-jerky performance. You're going to see a lot of feature loading into the back end of program increments and things like that. And you're not going to have a very efficient and effective engine. And finally, change without leadership is impossible. Leaders have to embrace new values, and they need to articulate this end state vision. If you don't have leadership in here, then you're never going to be able to do a true organizational transformation to something like the Scaled Agile framework. It doesn't matter how much grassroots support there is. You need to have this leadership. And you need to base this change on shared values and principles, particularly lean and agile principles. So I mentioned this thing before, I think, called the J-curve. This is a thing that occurs in any human population. And basically what it is you have some steady state, I'll call it business as usual in here. And that business as usual is not going to get you where you need to go. You realize that either through disruption in your industry or some aspect, you've got to change the way you work and go perform at a new level. That's the business as needed level. But anytime any population goes through change, they lose capability. Things that they used to do, they no longer do. There's new things to do. There's new words, new terminology, perhaps even new skills that they need to learn. When you first start to make that change, you fall into what's called the valley of despair. And a lot of programs don't get out of the valley of despair, and that's why a lot of change management activities fail. The change management has to start with leadership. Leadership is what causes that leap of faith. Now, you can have inspired leadership, servant leaders that jump with folks and lead the way, and you'll have a lot of people just jumping with them, and that's phenomenal. You can have fear-based leadership where you're at the edge of the cliff and they're pointing a gun at your back and they're going, jump over it. Well, you're not going to get a real big leap. What you're going to get is people jumping and holding on to the edge of that cliff and never really going fully into the valley of despair to change and improve, that sort of thing. But if you do jump into the valley of despair, how do you ensure that you have a soft landing? Well, that's where you can use things like the Scaled Agile framework, agile coaching, training, our bluejazz technology helps with that. And what this does is it provides you a soft landing. It provides you a set of techniques and skills for you to start applying to change the way you work. It doesn't mean that those are fully prescriptive, everything you need to do, but it's a great starting point for you to start applying and integrating into your own experience so that you can improve the way you work. Once you start to see that improvement, it creates confidence in the organization and fosters what we call BA, which is another word for swagger. It means that the team and the work are one. The team really feels that they can take on any kind of work, and that really starts to drive organizational agility. And so if you apply all of these different things within SAFe and you have the right leadership, you have a really, really good chance of leading a transformation in your organization. So that's it for my section. Sorry I ran a little bit long, but Pratik, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to go ahead and give a bluejazz demo.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone.
And hold on, I got to find you in the list there. There you go.
Okay, thank you. So right now what you see is bluejazz, and pardon us for the big picture. Right now it's 2.5, but very soon we are updating it to 3.0. And I'm going to continue with what Mike said about value of despair. So the biggest fear when we start talking about process change, and there are so many components associated with it. Roles, their responsibilities will change. Tools that will be used in order to go through this whole change process. So with bluejazz, what we have tried to do is when you go through these change and when you go through this inspect and adapt exercises, you derive your process. So SAFe is just a framework, and then you fit it for your organization. And with bluejazz, it's we create this more interactive and easy to adapt methods. So with what we have tried to do is we have tried to virtualize and give someone like Mike to you on on-demand basis. So I'm going to go through some samples over here. So first aspect, let's look at the process element. While you're going through this transformation and adoption of SAFe, and let's click at Agile Release Train. You have questions about Agile Release Train. What does it mean for you within your organization? So we create these videos that guides you through.
The Agile Release Train is the primary value delivery construct within SAFe. It's a long-lived team of teams that has all the resources on it that it needs to do its function.
So this is, I'm not going to play videos too long, but this is one method of demonstrating of what really it means within your organization when you talk about your processes and your roles. And same thing, we used, we depict the entire process in forms of animations. So I'll show you one more sample with regards to release planning. So if you want to have, if you have questions about how does release planning work within my organization. So let's look at this demonstration of team breakout. What does it mean by team breakout within release planning in my organization? So we utilize videos like these to demonstrate that.
So once the morning presentations are done and the team is ready to go to their first team breakout, they basically come to their team table and everybody sits around the table.
So it's basically mimicking exactly how your process and works within your organization, and how what are the responsibilities of individual roles within your organization. Now that's from the process standpoint. One of the bigger challenges when we start going through adapting new tools is learning new tools itself. And with our experience, adapting tools is one of a very difficult task, and people resist new tool sets, resist sitting in day, 2-day tools training. So that's one of the aspects we have tried to eliminate, is the whole concept of tools training. And within bluejazz, we have developed something called as a guide engine. So it's again a consultant basically sitting right next to you and guiding you through individual use cases that make sense to you and what you want to do within the tool. So here, one example, you can see within this team, I'm continuing with the same example, team breakout. Here are different roles involved in the team breakout. You can see on top and all the activities they would perform. And each activity now, let's say you are a program director and all you care about is review how your program is doing. So you can just click over here on that activity and you can go into do and learn section. So it basically, you can see over here, it goes, in this example, we have used Rational Team Concert, but the guide engine can work with any web-based tools you might have. And the idea is to apply guidance across the board, from planning tools, your portfolio management tools, your continuous integration tools, etc. And it is smart. So when it gives me exact pointer of what to where to click in order to complete this use case or activity. And it is smart. It knows I have completed first step, and just like a consultant would, it will tell me after you've done this, click on second step, and now click on third step. So this is the whole concept of tools guidance that we have built at a very high level. Now, one more element that I want to show over here is within Blue Agility, we have created a custom rational team concept template that supports your program planning. And I'll show you some of the views within the template. So this is a sample program that we have created called Mutual Funds Program. And there are several teams within this program. What you see over here is a dashboard of how that program is doing. And let's go into a few backlog views that I want to share with you guys. I'll open the program backlog. And the first view over here is feature and benefit metrics, which will show you clearly what are all the features identified for this program, what are the benefits for individual features, the types of features they are, whether it's NFR, business architecture, which epic they are associated with. Then we have a view for WSJF calculation. So our template is the only template, including Rally version 1 or any other tool that supports WSJF right now. So you can see clearly all the features are listed in the WSJF order, and you can change the values for these, and you can see the calculations being affected accordingly, and you can sort your features by the weighted shorted jobs first. Now, one more view I want to share, or one more backlog I want to share is your program increment backlog. So this sample is one of the first program increment plan, and you can see over here, the first thing you'll see is a completeness report. You can see all the sprints that are the execution sprints within the program increment, and then you can see the epics associated with them, features associated, and stories associated, and you can see the progress for individual story, rolled up progress for features, rolled up progress for epics, and you can see the overall completeness for your train and your program increment. Other important view is the PI objectives and sprint goals mapping. You can see a view within your backlog itself of how your program objectives are identified and which all goals are associated with individual teams for the individual sprints. Next is your PI roaming risks. So basically within SAFe, we categorize all the risks that are identified for your program increment into resolved, owned, accepted, or mitigated category, as you can see over here on the right-hand side. And this view will allow you to categorize those risks within your program increment. And at last, we have the program board, which shows the dependencies across teams and features, how these teams are interconnected, which sprint the feature is planned for, what's the type of the feature, and what other features or stories that this particular feature depends on, what are the risks associated with that feature. So that's our RTC template demo. Now, last but not least, what we have done with bluejazz is we have this rich repository of your real state, your true north. So we worked with IBM Watson, and we applied the cognitive intelligence on this repository of your process and tools guidance. And now what it does, it allows you to have natural human language, with using natural human language interaction and ask questions about your process, about tools usage, etc. So you can see over here on the bottom right corner, I can click and I can ask questions around what is WSJF, and you can get responses from the repository, and you can have interactions with Watson. So that's all I have with bluejazz. So I'll transfer it back to you, Mike. Thanks.
Thanks, Pratik. So I guess we've got just a couple minutes here for some questions. Ashley, do you want to open up the mic, or how do you do that? Are people going to raise hands, or how will anyone ask questions?
Yeah, I'll have everyone, if you do have questions, just simply type it in the question screen there, and we'll be happy to answer them live. Not seeing any come through. Sure, go ahead.
I'll ask a question. Can bluejazz be customized for my needs and my process and my tools usage, etc.? The answer is yes, it can be. That's the whole idea. So very soon we are releasing a bluejazz designer that will allow you to record everything that you see over here, allow you to train Watson, allow you to create guides around the tools that you use, whether it's Jira, whether it's Rally, any tool that is web-based.
Perfect. Thanks, Pratik. And thank you, Mike and Pratik, and everyone who attended. We know that it's not always easy to take this hour out of your day, especially in the middle of the week. It's our hope that you not only learn some new things to bring back to your team, but that you're excited about the content that was shared. And just a reminder that this is the third webinar in the 4-part Agile Empowered series. The fourth and last webinar, Empower the Portfolio with bluejazz, will be held, that's November 4th. It's a Tuesday at noon Eastern. So in true Agile fashion, we do shape our webinars based on attendee feedback and inspect and adapt accordingly. So please take a moment to fill out the short survey. It'll pop up right when this webinar ends. And once again, thank you all, and we hope to talk to you soon. Take care, everyone.
Sorry, Ashley. One last thing is
Go ahead.
everything that you saw with regards to bluejazz. It's an open public URL right now. Please go ahead and register. You'll have access to all the videos, every aspect of SAFe. You can go through those videos, play around with the guides, etc.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Take care.